Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My final board matter is a joint board matter with you and with Supervisor Lusk. Mr. Chairman, Lake Accotink Park is one of Fairfax County's most beloved resources. Its 476.2 acres of natural resources, trails, picnic areas, and waterfront activities draw hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. The 55-acre Lake Accotink, a man-made reservoir originally built by the U.S. Army, is a key feature of the park. Because Lake Accotink is a man-made lake in the midst of a densely developed 30-square-mile watershed, it's required regular dredging in order to remove sediment and prevent it from returning to its natural state. The most recent dredge took place in 2008. Since 2014, Fairfax County has been exploring ways to address increased sedimentation and to preserve Lake Accotink. In 2019, after an outpouring of community support for preserving the lake, Fairfax County developed a plan to dredge the lake at a cost of $30.5 million. That plan also envisioned a permanent infrastructure to facilitate future maintenance dredging. Unfortunately, additional analysis has determined that more sediment will need to be removed than previously estimated. The processing site originally envisioned is not suitable, and the cost to dispose of the processed sediment in a local quarry are significant. As a result, the initial base dredge is now projected to cost $95 million, and the total cost to dredge and maintain Lake Accotink over the next $25 years is $395 million. Fairfax County staff have recommended that Lake Accotink not be dredged and instead recommend restarting the park's master planning process with an emphasis on developing a sustainable vision for the lake and the park. At the board's environmental committee meeting held on April 25th, I shared that I would ask the board to establish a task force on the future of Lake Accotink. That task force will be chaired by former Board of Supervisors Chairman Sharon Bulova. It will include former Braddock District Supervisor John Cook and consist of representatives of the community, environmental and nonprofit organizations, and a representative of the Park Authority. Task force members will serve as liaisons to their respective communities and organizations by relaying information and soliciting feedback. County staff should serve in an advisory role. The task force should meet regularly and conduct a review and develop findings on the previous studies performed by Arcadis and WSSI on the dredging plan to ensure that all possible options have been considered to preserve Lake Accotink in the most sustainable, equitable, and cost-effective manner possible. Identify relevant information needs and questions that should be addressed should the board proceed with studying a managed wetland option, and develop findings on the potential impacts of the managed wetland option. Identify relevant information needs and questions that should be addressed should the board consider a hybrid option involving some area of open water along with a managed wetland, and develop findings on the potential impacts of that hybrid option. And finally, task force findings shall consider the impacts to the environment, surrounding communities, recreational uses of the park, and financing, including ongoing maintenance. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board of Supervisors authorize the creation of the task force on the future of Lake Accotink and direct the county executive to assign the necessary staff from the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services to provide support services to the task force. The task force on the future of Lake Accotink shall be convened this summer and work with staff to establish a timeline to complete its work and report back to the Board of Supervisors. Mr. Chairman, I so move.
And I'm happy to second that motion. Discussion on the motion, Supervisor Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to start by thanking former Chairman Bulova for agreeing to take on this task. This is not a light duty assignment. This is a very significant, this will be a very significant process, obviously of great import to not just the Braddock District, but the entire county. I also appreciate Supervisor Cook agreeing to serve and participate in that process. Both of them over the years have been involved in conversations and work around dredging of Lake Accotink. And as I said at our environmental committee meeting, I think it's really important to bring the community and the community's representatives into this process rather than our staff and our consultants doing work and then reporting it to the community. And I'm hopeful that the task force working alongside our staff from Public Works and Environmental Services will be able to surface options that maybe haven't been fully considered, some which are laid out in the board matter. So I appreciate the conversations I've had with my colleagues about this challenging process, but I feel good about where we are now and the work that the task force will do, and appreciate your consideration of the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other discussion? Supervisor Lusk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to also extend my thanks to Supervisor Walkinshaw for bringing forward this motion. I'll be clear in saying that in my community, this is a pretty tough issue as well, particularly with the Springfield Civic Association. I've mentioned this to Supervisor Walkinshaw. I've said that that group would be a part of this task force, and that expectation has been noted here as well, so I appreciate Supervisor Walkinshaw for that. I'll just reiterate that there are, a couple really important things here, and I know that the environment is something that we certainly have to be thinking about, and then the impacts to the community as we kind of define what are the best options. So I appreciate the language referencing those 2 points, and look forward to hearing what the recommendations are that come back from this task force. And just want to acknowledge, I know this has just been a vexing issue in terms of all of the information, the difficulty around the cost, the difficulty around defining what the future will be for Lake Accotink. And I know there's a lot of emotion around it, and I acknowledge that. And as a person who uses Lake Accotink as well, I appreciate the value, and I appreciate the trails and the water features. All of those amenities are so important, but we do have to figure out what is possible, and look forward to understanding from the task force where we might be. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Supervisor Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Supervisor Lusk, and let me also add my thanks, and I appreciate.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, I had a few comments. Unless you're wrapping up.
I can wrap it up. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. A couple of things. First, very happy to see we got a trusted name in Chairman Bulova leading the task force. So that is really good news. What I would consider, I couldn't tell whether it was in here or not. The financing is in there once, but I think it's important that the task force also look at all potential sources of funding for such a project, whether they be federal, state, or obviously local. I don't know whether that's a friendly amendment or it's built in, but looking for the maker of the motion to.
Yeah, but I think that's implied under financing. Obviously, a lot of that work has been done, but part of what the task force will do, as I mentioned, is look at all of the work that has already been done and determine if anything has been missed. And obviously, as you know, Supervisor Harity, the funding source that the board has approved multiple times is a revolving water quality fund from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yes. Yep. But I don't know that we fully exhausted the federal fund search, and that was really what the intent of the comment. And then obviously we're looking at the impacts if we go with the hybrid downstream, the environmental impacts downstream. But I think that is built in. So thank you very much for the motion.
Thank you. And I was mentioning I wanted to thank Supervisor Walkinshaw for organizing this, but also soliciting our input to get to this point. I do think this is the next step that is necessary. As we discussed at the environmental committee meeting, there are a lot of unanswered questions here still, and I think the concern reasonable and expected concern of us and of members of the community about such an abrupt change in terms of cost and recognition, recommendation of our county staff. While, I respect the work that they've done and the work that the consultants have done, I don't think that the public has had an in-depth opportunity really to dig into those findings, critique them, challenge them, ask questions about them. Whatever decision is made here, as also a user of the park, like several of my colleagues, whatever decision is made here will undoubtedly shape the future of this treasured facility for lifetimes. So this is not, a decision we make and, we can change it a year or two from now. Whatever decision is made here will have a profound impact. And I don't think that, taking the extra time to involve the community is a step backwards. I think it's a step forward. And the community has been involved to date, but to your point, it has been in response to reports and findings of the county and not really in a roundtable type of a discussion about what are the alternatives. As I mentioned, the environmental committee meeting, before considering what happens with this lake, the public should also have a very good understanding of, if we go down a certain path, this is what it will look like. And this is what the environmental benefits, pros and cons, might be of doing that. And we have not vetted that to the level that any of us would expect on something that is this important. And so I think this is the next move that needs to be made. And I appreciate that Chairman Bulova agreed to chair this committee, because everyone who will be on this committee has a lot of deep history with this particular park. And having that deep history, I think, will be really important in fairly sorting through the options and coming back to us with what those recommendations are moving forward, so that ultimately a decision could be made. And so I really respect that and respect the list of organizations and people that will be included in this, and look forward to following this. And lastly, while we're convening it this summer and we want it to work through the summer, we're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of history out there. But we do hope that this task force will meet often and get back to us in a reasonable time frame with what their findings are, so that we ultimately can make a decision and move forward with what the future of Lake Accotink will be. And so with that, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? And that motion carries.